and welcome to the Freedom Hub Working Group. I'm your host, Jeff Cantor, along with our co-host, with our co-host, Charles Froman. And this is being sponsored by your Freedom Hub. All these episodes are being recorded. They're available at the following links. They are case sensitive. If you're the first time here and you'd like to register and see these on the oncoming basis, just register at that top link and you'll get a notice every week. And then today we have a special guest, but before we get over there, as I indicated, we do have a Facebook page that we operate. So you'll want to come and take a look at that and become a part of the discussion over here. We do a lot of announcements and so on. As I said, it's sponsored by the Hub. And there are an awful lot of videos. These are a couple sites here where we're located. And you'll see there's an awful lot of them to look at, and they go back a long time. There's some really, really great guests we've had over time and some really fantastic topics, which are not getting anywhere near enough airing in the public square. So you'll certainly want to come in here and do what you can to help participate and drive that forward a little bit. But for today, let's kind of see what we've got on the agenda. So Charles, if you'll do the honors here.
Sure, Jeff, and welcome, Dave. I think I met Dave through LinkedIn for some reason, and what is interesting about him to me, among his other interesting facets, is he lives near Wallops Island, which is the spaceport in Virginia's Eastern Shore barrier islands, where a lot of private space companies launch their rockets. So Dave somehow is tied to the telecom world and has some big ideas that solve some serious problems we all think about with government snooping, or now tech censorship, social media privacy, and free speech. He does run a couple ventures, WMDS TV, which I'm going to mess up the acronym. He can correct me in a second. And he has a project called Irrevocable, which answers that problem about privacy, free speech, and being able to be creative in this world without the folks on top smothering your creativity. So that's what we're going to hear about today, Jeff.
Wow, that sounds really fantastic. David, I've got these slides up and ready to go here, so why don't you take over?
All right. Since they're on your machine, I'm not sure how to...
Just say next. How about that? Right. We'll get real high tech.
All right. We'll start with this. This is a project that I began working on a couple of years ago, and with the events of the last few years, the Mueller debacle and impeachment, and now the pandemic, it's really become apparent that we need to burrow through the mainstream media and enable freedom advocates to have much greater penetration to reach the general public and get the word out. I'm a great fan of what BitChute and Brighteon and others are doing, but the problem is that they're becoming private silos where we're all basically talking to each other. And so I began looking at what sort of technology base we would need to get around the growing tide of censorship. And I've come up with a few solutions that I think we can implement over the next year or so. Go to the next slide, please. As many of you know, or anyone who's paying attention should know, the pandemic that we're experiencing now is a contrivance like 9/11. This whole thing has been orchestrated. What we're being told by the mainstream media doesn't make any sense. You've got a Frankengerm, an engineered pathogen. We know that it's artificial because we know who designed it, when, where, how, and why. But we're being told that this came from some dodgy bat soup at a farmer's market. And the public will believe that, just like they bought the cover story for 9/11 for the last 20 years. I think if we don't find ways of penetrating that mindset that the deep state has tried to instill in everyone, we're in for far worse problems in the future than we've ever imagined in the past. And the situation with censorship is going to get worse, not better. And we need to plan for it. Next, please. If you'll recall, almost 2 years ago, on August 6th in 2018, that was when they pushed Alex Jones and InfoWars off of all the social media platforms simultaneously, including Spotify and Apple iTunes and so forth. He wasn't the only one that was deplatformed and censored. There were 100 or so other alternative media outlets and independent commentators and freelance journalists that were banned, shadow banned, otherwise suppressed along with him. And that censorship had the effect of swinging the 2018 midterm election. There's really very little doubt about that. That made the difference. And what is going on now with coronavirus public health information as the pretext, there's another wave of censorship, which just the other day claimed David Icke. And he's now been completely banned off of YouTube and so forth. As I say, this will continue. It will get worse rather than better. And if Joe Biden or whoever they replace Biden with wins the election in November, they will appoint an FCC that will enfranchise all of these Silicon Valley terms and conditions and community guidelines into the Code of Federal Regulations. They'll do it under the guise of net neutrality redo and use the Title II Common Carriage regs to enforce it. This will enfranchise censorship across the internet by ISPs, CDNs, and so forth. Your website will have to be politically correct or it will be banned. All of this, all the platforms you're using now. How will they get away with that? They've already pledged to end the legislative filibuster and to pack the Supreme Court if necessary in order to do so. In reality, they will only need to take the Senate along with the White House to be able to do this. And so that's where we are. Next, please. You've already heard in discussion of the present crisis the efforts that they're mounting. Vast amounts of content have been banned and shadow banned on the basis that it doesn't fit the official narrative or challenges the information provided by the NIH or the CDC or the World Health Organization, all of which are spewing vast amounts of propaganda that's at variance with the facts, both scientific and sociological and economic. Various states are recruiting armies of contact tracers now to hunt you down if you're not playing by the rules. And a variety of different approaches to personal health chips are being floated. Gates and others have patents on these. The product already exists. There are various demos going on already around the country, but it won't take much for these to become commonplace. Hello?
You're here.
Oh, okay. Video disappeared. It won't take much for these to become commonplace, and shortly after that, they will become compulsory. You may have seen the nationwide car insurance commercials where you can get a discount if you carry this device in your car that monitors your driving. Well, they'll do the same thing for health insurance. and eventually you'll need it to get coverage, and eventually you'll need it for Medicare and Medicaid and VA, and your Medicare for all when they extend it. That's coming in the next few years, almost no matter what. And of course, 5G. Now, 5G didn't cause this pandemic, but it's certainly going to be one of the biggest beneficiaries from it, as everyone gets used to staying at home and conducting meetings like this. And it will create at least the appearance of a need for 5G. The reality is that there's only one application that requires the bandwidth 5G provides. There's only one application that can even make good use of it, and that's mass market brain-computer interface technology, which will be rolled out in future waves of 5G wearable phones later in the 2020s. We know that because that has been their objective since 1969, and we can trace back to a committee report that came out that year, published by Rockefeller University Press, which outlined it. It was called the Prometheus Project, Mankind's Search for Long-Range Goals. It was a committee appointed in 1962 alongside the creation of ARPANET, and the report was rendered in 1969, 7 years later, within weeks of ARPANET going operational. It was a study produced under the auspices of Columbia University by Dr. Gerald Feinberg. And its goal, it outlines the premier goal for mankind as the electronic integration of all human consciousness into a single collective hive mind. Well, here we are 50 years later, and within the next 10 years, that goal stands ready to be realized. And a lot of what we're seeing now is just going to pour right into that as augmented and virtual reality becomes ubiquitous, even necessary, and BCI is the next logical follow-on to that. We know that for the last 10 years, mass market BCI has been possible, but it wouldn't work for the mass market without upgrading the networks. In 2009, Intel distributed 100 prototypes of a 48-core single cloud computer chip, a low power consumption mobile device chip with 48 cores, a mobile supercomputer. They gave out 100 prototypes of that to device makers for testing. The same year, Sony took out a variety of patents on transcranial, so-called non-invasive brain-computer interface. So the hardware, the technology has been there. It's been waiting on the network bandwidth. And for everyone who's afraid of 5G, forget the radiologic toxicity. They could mail you a lump of plutonium and it wouldn't be as dangerous as what they're actually going to do with 5G and the uses it will be put functioning as intended. But that's enough of that rant. Let me get on to what we can do to fight it. Next. Next. Yeah, there we go. No, back one. Back one. There we go. Okay. Among the things that won't work in this against this rising tide of censorship are new media social networks or video aggregators. Yeah, I love these platforms and the people who've created them. Minds, Gab, BitChute, Brighteon, but they've become ghettos for the fringe. And while it's preaching to the choir is great, if we don't get out and start educating the larger public, we're going to be the most informed prisoners in history. Another thing that's not going to fix this is the FTC, or Department of Justice through antitrust action, whether under President Trump's first term, or should he be successful in re-election in second term? This stuff is embedded in the fabric of the economy and telecom technology, and is going to keep progressing regardless. The underlying problem is that President Trump never purged the deep state, and that's why we've seen two different coup attempts, and we're seeing this orchestrated pandemic. Silicon Valley is spending more money on Congress than any industry ever has, and that's going to become even more evident in the fall election. This isn't something that can be fixed with guns. As I've noted, Second Amendment is necessary but insufficient as a remedy to this situation. Some of my slides may not have paginated properly, but that's all right. At any rate, I feel the answer is that we need to create independent physical transport conduits for alternative media that are inherently uncensorable. There are a variety of technologies for doing this, and they probably all need to be pursued in parallel, although we're going to concentrate on just a few of them. But the bottom line is that all of the existing infrastructure, all of it, all of the platforms and delivery mechanisms for media that exist today, we have to find ways around, because censorship will extend to them over the next 5 years, more or less. Next. Among the technologies that could be useful in this that we're looking at is Wi-Fi ad hoc mesh networking, which is where your home Wi-Fi is connected to a neighbor's, which is connected to a neighbor's, and so forth. And a connection can be available through those networks, but not from without. Tests on Wi-Fi mesh networking like this have been done primarily by the left, actually, but they've been able to cover many square miles and reach tens of thousands of people, or be accessible by tens of thousands of people. These were typically demonstrations by anarchists who want free internet, and that's fine. They never managed to develop it into anything because they had no business model that would make it function economically. But we have a way of solving that. But the basic technology is now well developed and can be easily used. There are opportunities for L-band satellite. You may be familiar with OtherNet, which broadcasts data over small receivers similar to a Sirius XM satellite radio. Both the receiver and the bandwidth on that have gotten tremendously cheaper over the last few years. And of course, Starlink and other constellations in LEO are becoming available over the next few years. We also have opportunities in the Internet of Things. Now, in the way it has been conceived in telecom and by Silicon Valley, in the Internet of Things, we are to be the things. But we can use the technology to disseminate information, including video, in ways that they had not intended. And there are a variety of guerrilla technology approaches to that I won't go into in detail. And there are a number of experimental technologies for non-RF wireless communication that have reached a point where they are going to become useful over the next 5 years. And then, of course, there are more traditional means, snail mail and printed matter, which are today harder to censor than electronic. And of course, meetings like this, we're doing this now because people aren't meeting in person as much as they do normally. But in the future, in-person meetings in homes, in living rooms, off the record, may turn out to be a major form of spreading the word, as it has been in the past, as it was behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War. The samizdat approach of hand-distributed printed matter as underground media. We need to think in terms of all of the available methodologies that might be used, because I'm telling you, the problem is going to get that bad, and it's going to get that bad here halfway through this decade. Next. The first thing that I'm looking to do is to create a peering exchange for all of the various off-net projects that already exist. You may be familiar with Tor, I2P, IPFS, and there are a variety of others, Freenet and ZeroNet. All of these are approaches to making communication, social networking, and mass media uncensorable. And we want to facilitate these. Right now, it's very splintered. They don't interoperate, so forth. We're going to create a platform called Amptonox, the Alternative Media Peering and Transport Off-Net Nebular Orthogonal Content Exchange. And Amptonox will enable these various off-net systems to interoperate, to share content, to interconnect in ways that users on one can send and receive and communicate content with users on others. And this will operate through a set of redundant network exchange points that will be separated geographically and technologically in such a way that it will be impossible to bring down this peering exchange. One of the exchange points will be in Iceland, for example, which has the world's toughest internet freedom laws. Another in Switzerland, others here in the United States and elsewhere. But anyway, that's going to be part of my early focus that we expect to have operational later this year. Next. Among the projects that we're working on, Whole Media Diffusion Service, WMDS-TV, will be an alternative news channel which will deal with politics and international and conventional news. World Esoteric News Bureau will deal with some other topics a little more outside the mainstream. These will be two internet television stations that will broadcast over these off-nets in ways that their live streams cannot be censored. Irrevocable will be a service tailored to the end user. It will present a cable guide-like interface over Wi-Fi using the ad hoc mesh networking technologies, such that a single user in an area who is receiving the program stream via satellite or through one of the off-nets, through a VPN and in ways that are invisible to his ISP, then retransmits this content over Wi-Fi through a mesh network covering their neighborhood or precinct, if you will, such that anyone else can log on just by finding it among their available wireless connections and clicking on it, whereby they're presented with a splash screen that is like a cable guide from which they can select any of a half dozen or so programming channels that will be initially offered. In addition, we will have a low data rate wire service called Naughty Wire, which will present at 300 baud the equivalent of a teletype, a continuous text feed of the latest breaking news from across alternative media. And there are a variety of ways that that data rate can be sustained and distributed in parallel fashion among a variety of different platforms, such that it will be available anywhere and, again, impossible to censor or shut down. Ultimately, in the next 5 years, I'm hoping that we can build and orbit a couple of twin 100-kilogram class microsatellites carrying some experimental transponders and onboard storage and processing that will support a lot of this. None of the systems that I mentioned are dependent on us doing this, but it would provide another layer of independence that may become necessary in the future if Starlink and other platforms also fall under censorship. And I think that's about it. Next. And here's how to reach me, preferably by instant messaging on LinkedIn or by email to C. Templar. But there's all my contact information. And that's it for the introduction.
All right, very good. Thanks very much. Some hands are popping up there. I have to tell you there, David, though, that little presentation of yours sounds like an updated version of Fahrenheit 451.
I'll tell you, I've given up on the idea that it can't happen here.
Which is not a promising thought, but it's nice to know that we're paying attention because hopefully something can be done. Let's see what some of the people in the audience have to say. David, I see you've got your hand up.
David, this is David Demarest in Omaha. I applaud your technology efforts. Do you see that the primary solution to these problems is technological, or could this be used to facilitate, let's say, regulation nullification efforts, peaceful civil disobedience, if you will?
I believe that the solution will be technological. I've been watching things like the pro se legal movement and jury nullification. I've been watching all that stuff for literally 40 years and seen nothing come of it. I'd like to feel that would change, but I'm not hopeful for those kind of solutions.
Kishore, I see your hand up. Are you there? All right, we'll come back for a minute. Charles?
Thanks, Jeff. And Dave, a fantastic presentation. I think I agree with Jeff that it was a bit scary in a Fahrenheit 451 fashion. I did catch your remark that the COVID remedy the government wants to force on us, whether it be a trackable chip or some dangerous reverse GMO vaccine, would be a required ticket to even get health coverage. I think that makes what Jeff and I are doing commercially even more important, using sharing instead of insurance. And I think the lack of regulation affecting sharing companies probably is why the captured regulatory agencies are going after sharing so much because they don't want innovative entrepreneurs acting outside their captured regulatory process. But actually, Jeff, I raised my hand to go to John Rickey to give his telecom background-based response to what Dave presented, because I know he has some similar concerns and some innovative solutions of his own. If you want to hear from John to respond on Dave.
Sure, John, I would say go for it.
All right. Well, I thought it was a great presentation, David. You and I have talked before about all of this. One of the key things that I see that's needed with this decentralization to bring about a more democratization process where we have choice versus no choice, and this is what why I created Stream Life in the first place, was to make sure that everyone had a voice and that we could decentralize this. And every year I travel for 2 months and go across America, and I've noticed that the rural America has been blocked by Google. I can't even go into rural America anymore, it seems like. So everything's getting towards this AI thing, and you see greater and greater controls in the cities, and it just seems to be out of control. Not good for people. So what my goal is to allow decentralization and to have peer-to-peer broadcasting capabilities from our own smart home hubs, where we've got smart home centers. You can be in control of your life. It's your life. It's Stream Life, versus the government controlling your life. So we want to have self-government and bring people together into projects where they can work on technologies and then bump it up to Startup Watch TV. And this came from David Demarest, who is a key proponent in this, where we're going to have an entrepreneurial explosion. So what does this do? This takes all the causes, and actually we're putting solutions together that are not big government solutions, and one size fits all, but choice. Whether it's education choice, we have Education Watch TV, whether it's alternative companies getting into space programs, Space Frontier Foundation, when I was able to go to NASA Ames Research Center and be a part of that whole evolution. So you get this freedom of people working on their projects and then getting funded. So we have really, last time I went to NAB, one of the guys from Pixel said, hey, do you have anything for buy-sell trade? And so I came up with TradeTown TV. So all these, and then he said, well, what do you got for dating? So I've got Date Life TV. So we've got pretty much a way for people to be free and to do their thing, whether it's sell their artwork or be a rock star on Concert Tour TV. And then we're going to start with, and then we're going to have 8K launching from LA. So once we have 8K working, and now it looks like with this LifeSafe program, we have a real solution for getting people back to work. And so that's what I'm trying to do today, is get this outline finished with, so we can get the funding. Thank you, Charles, for bringing together everyone. I mean, this has been really important that we're all here together and working on this. So if it wasn't for you, I don't think any of this would have happened. So
I agree, Charles. This kind of networking is very important, probably more critical than it's ever been. There are a number of other players that we probably need to bring together in the same kind of forum. We're working on other alternative approaches to video production, distribution, other distributed video applications. John, it's great to see you. We've been talking for probably for over a year, but I'm glad that things are going well for you.
I'll tell you, John and David, before we continue, this is going to somewhat become problematic, because now Charles is not going to be able to live with himself. after all those accolades. Marilyn, I see you've got your hand up.
I just have a question about 5G. There's been so much negative talk and conspiracy theory talk and all this stuff. Can you just address that, David?
Yes, while I'm sympathetic to the arguments of those who oppose it based on radiologic toxicity, and there's probably something to it there, because the 5G system, once it's fully deployed, which it isn't yet, but ultimately when they hang the box off the light pole outside your house, it's going to be transmitting at far higher frequencies and at higher power levels than any wireless system before. And no, there have not been adequate tests on any of that. But having said that, I don't see that as the major problem. That's not the reason to oppose 5G. The real problem with 5G is what they're going to be using it for. The application it'll be put to when it's functioning properly. Yeah, we'll start by making zero latency augmented and virtual reality commonplace. But even those applications don't need all of that bandwidth. In reality, there's only one application for which all of the capability of 5G can be utilized, and that is mass market brain-computer interface. You will have a phone in the future that you wear on your head. It'll start off with just AR, VR apps, but the next wave after that, in the second half of this decade, will be brain-computer interface, neurotechnology. And as exciting as that sounds to some people, to me, that's an extinction level event. I don't see how humanity in anything we would recognize survives mass market BCI becoming accepted and commonplace. The danger there is just too great. It is a drone yoke. Think of 5G BCI as a drone yoke on humanity. And it doesn't matter whether the reins of that yoke are held by the tech lords in Silicon Valley, some rogue spooks in the deep state, the NSA, an artificial intelligence, or aliens on the moon. It doesn't matter, because the net effect will be the same. The end of individual liberty and freedom as we have known it. Even a simple phone call, even the act of putting just a voice phone call inside your head with brain-computer interface necessitates that the device be able to write to your wetware as well as read it. Now think about that for a minute. Once you have a phone, once everybody has a phone that is basically writing to their wetware, they can be reprogrammed in any way that whoever's running the system chooses, and they won't even know that it's being done. And I mean, it's just the horror to end all horrors. And but when it comes out, people will camp out in line in front of Best Buy for days and sell their grandmothers by the pound to be among the first to get one. And we know that because we see how people are behaving now with their smartphones, walking down the street in a daze, and how they react to the next shiny piece of new technology. So I think that is that's the real singularity we have to worry about, is when 5G BCI is released. And of course, where that intersects with artificial general intelligence or artificial super intelligence, that's it. Kiss it all goodbye. There is no other issue that matters by that point. Finding a way to either head that off, which I don't see happening, or better, or at least to create an alternative communications system for those who choose not to jack into the system, I think is the only the only possibility we'll have to salvage anything out of what's to come. And I know how dismal that sounds.
With that abysmal situation that you're painting there, is it just strictly for monetary purposes, just of commercial activity, or is it more nefarious than that for sure?
Well, I mean, think about it. When nefarious parties, whether it's government or corporate or whomever, um, can do what they've already done with our smartphones, hack all your personal information, turn on your microphone or your camera without your knowledge or consent, listen in your bedroom over your Alexa, all of this that we've already seen. I had an episode where I was outside describing a brake problem on the car to a friend of ours, and I had never discussed it online with anyone and never looked for a solution or parts or anything online, but I had my phone in my pocket at the time. And I came in, and within a few hours, I was seeing targeted ads for a very specific brake part that my friend had discussed when we were out in the driveway looking at the car. And absolutely the only way that those ads could have been targeted would have been through the microphone on my phone when the phone was not in use. And millions of people have had experiences like this. And if the systems can do that with the technology we have now, what do you think is going to happen when they can tap into your brain?
Getting to be a little scarier there, David. Kishore, got your hand up.
I have a question about the technology, this decentralized mesh networks, or ad hoc networks as they're called sometimes. So the last I looked at them, they still have problems in managing the networking of the data because they're not centrally managed. They're just a bunch of devices interconnected. So where are we in that? I mean, can it handle such large volumes of data and do it in an organized way like routers do?
Well, there's been a lot of research and a lot of experiments done with ad hoc mesh networking using Wi-Fi. Most all of it has been done in academic and nonprofit and activist circles on the left. That was back when people on the left also believed in decentralization and were afraid of the establishment. That pretty much died out a few years ago, although the technology worked quite well and they had overcome a lot of these problems that you're talking about, but they had no concept of operation or business case or means of turning it into a financially sustainable enterprise that would pay for deploying the infrastructure needed to make it happen. I think that conservatives can do a lot better with that or libertarians can do better with that than the anarchists did, just because we understand how economics works.
Right, interesting.
Guy, so you've got your hand up.
Yeah, this is for David. I was just wondering, George Gilder had a time just a while ago where he was hawking a kind of investment into blockchain for use on the internet to actually make the internet, bring it up to date as far as security. And I'm just wondering if he's involved in alternative networks as well.
I don't know if he is. I wouldn't be surprised. There are probably a half dozen major approaches to using blockchain technology for alternative media distribution, and I applaud all of them. Blockstack, Holosync, or holo chain. There are a variety of them. We will create opportunities for peering and content sharing and so on to those distribution modalities, and I hope to use those, but I do not intend to become dependent on blockchain for a few important reasons. There are vulnerabilities in the blockchain methodology that the cryptocurrency people don't address or don't want to deal with, or perhaps it doesn't affect them for monetary applications, but could be dangerous in terms of censorship for if it was the sole means of distributing alternative media.
Charles, I see you've got your hand up.
Sure. David, wasn't brought out a bit in this webinar about your background, which gave you the knowledge and experience to give this presentation today, because this was a deep dive, with serious concern about where we are and why and where to go. So what kind of background do you have, experiential, and how's that giving you the knowledge to kind of tell us what's happening and what to do?
Well, I've been bouncing around between aerospace, telecom, and finance, and so on for a number of years. I've worked in telecom and been looking at some of these concepts for alternative media distribution for several years. I've been involved in community access cable and radio, talk radio, and so on. But a lot of what we're seeing now requires a fusion of these different things, and I think, as I said at the top of the webinar, I believe the solutions are going to be technological rather than anything else. I've been involved in aerospace in a variety of ways over the last 40 years. And while I welcome what we're seeing now with the new generation of low Earth orbit constellations, and I think that may provide some insulation against some of the surveillance and censorship. The vote is still out on that, and we may literally have to put our own spacecraft in orbit to have a totally secure, inherently uncensorable means of distributing alternative media. And that's one of the reasons that I'm here at Wallops and involved with a variety of technology companies on both the launch and payload end.
Unfortunately, it is going to require that in the end, regardless, for sure, even just as a backup plan. Mm-hmm. David, why don't you slip in the last question we've got here for today for David?
Okay, David, for people to start using your technology, you're going to have to get the word out. So how do you plan to market your technology and spread the word?
Well, that's interesting, because we've come to the conclusion that it's going to take some marketing and good old-fashioned visceral reality. And one of the things that I'm looking at, I'm very interested in, is USB drives, which can now be very cheap and easy to mass produce and distribute. Let me see, I don't know if I have one handy I can show you, but you can now have produced a USB drive that fits in a plastic, like a credit card, and it has a little dongle on it that flips around, and you can plug it into a USB port. And these can be designed to carry anywhere from 2 gigabytes to 128 or 256 gigabytes of content and software. So I'm looking at basically distributing these in the way that AOL did CDs back in the 90s. You remember how they used to carpet bomb everyone with the AOL CDs?
At the post office, everywhere you went.
Yeah, well, I think
you're gonna have to invest in some navigable bottles. You can just float those around the oceans with those USB things in there.
But I'm literally looking at the distribution of millions, even tens of millions, of USB drives as a way of overcoming the censorship. And
I'll tell you, some of those networks you're trying to band together, it's inherent in them to spread the word. So you're going to have an awful lot of foot soldiers just by who you're trying to rally. And again, you know, what we've been trying to do in the health world is get all these just separate cash-oriented doctors that tend to be just lone wolves to be together for a change. You're going to get everybody else to get together for a change. It's just breaking through beyond, like you said, the silo of the choir preaching to the choir that's going to finally flick that switch. So, you know, I'll tell you this much, David, we're going to really be excited to see kind of what happens next and what you engage in next. So we're going to want to sort of help drive that equation. So I definitely want to thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you very much. And I'd be very happy to hear from anyone that would like to be involved in it or has any comments or suggestions.
Excellent. Well, all the contact information you've given out, and then also will be posted in the notes of the video itself, and which will be released this coming weekend. So come Monday, everyone will be able to review it. So we're definitely going to help drive this, I assure you. So thanks again for today.
Thank you.